Good afternoon, everyone. It's the last session of the day, and all of the speakers appreciate that they are standing between you and putting on your outfits for the 80s and getting dressed, so we would like to get underway. My name's Jennifer Hughes. I'm an environment planning lawyer at Beattie Hughes & Associates, so I've got a particular interest in hearing our speakers today talk about how various applications make their way through the planning process. The first presentation we have today is from Michael Richardson from Masterplan. He's going to be talking about so the world doesn't end sometimes in the planning process. Thanks, Michael.
Good afternoon, everyone. Planning, it's often not the most exciting thing, so I'm just going to talk nice and quickly to try and fit as much in as possible and not stand between you and getting dressed up for any longer than I need to. I'm a town planner and I work predominantly assisting clients to obtain regulatory approvals across a wide range of sectors, obviously including this one, but also energy, infrastructure, mining and agricultural value adding. The presentation's a bit more expansive than just our sector because the issues that we face are the same as issues that complex applications in other sectors face. And having worked in this sector for many years, indeed coming to this conference quite a few times, we hear common themes, and I've heard them again a few times over the last few days about approvals and how difficult they are to obtain. Unreasonable requirements, inconsistent policy, how the process is getting in the way of good outcomes. Now, all of these things are true. I've been there with a wide variety of clients on a very wide variety of projects, but I'll let you in on an unfortunate truth. None of those issues are going away, and in fact, it's most probably going to get even more difficult in future. The planning utopia of faster, better approvals with more certainty for applicants and for the community, unfortunately isn't coming to a development site near you anytime soon. When you ask people what is it you actually want from planning, you often get an answer along the lines of, I want an unfettered right to do whatever I want on my land, and I want a veto over whatever anyone else wants to do on theirs. Now, if you own an island, that's going to work pretty well, and if you don't, we have a problem. Now, I'm not getting dressed up tonight, so here's a picture of me in a 10-year-old $8 Santa suit at my annual Santa Rampage pub crawl. And here's another photo of me in that same old Santa suit, and this time I'm at a different pub called the Crown and Anchor. Anyone from South Australia? There you go, you might know the Crown and Anchor. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Many activities in our sector need more than one approval. They've got different names in different jurisdictions, but essentially we're talking about a development approval and then also operational or environmental approvals. I'm going to focus on the development approvals today. I've said for many years that our sector is typically quite good at obtaining and managing those operational approvals, which are aligned with the way that we work on a day-to-day basis. I'd also suggest our sector is typically less good at development approvals. A lot of this can be traced back to our sector being comprised of operators, not developers. So it's really logical that we're more comfortable with the things that we know well. A development approval is a point-in-time assessment of a specific proposal to determine its suitability. Typically, it assesses land use and built form in the context of a specific parcel of land and the locality that surrounds it. A development approval typically confers an inalienable set of rights upon the land, which endure in perpetuity. In all but a few cases, development approvals, irrespective of who obtains them, they will continue to travel with the land. Whoever occupies that land in future gains the benefit of that development approval automatically. Development approvals are limited to activities that are defined as development. That varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But the controls on land use tend to be broad, and often subsequent evolution or change of approved uses within that same category or genus doesn't need further assessment and approval. Development approvals also tend to be upper limiting. How high is my building? How many tonnes of material will I process? How many trucks or cars will access the site? They set maximums, they put boxes over things. Now, contemporary planning systems stream development into an assessment pathway. So, as an example, we're going to have a look at how it works here in South Australia. Let's not worry too much about exempt and accepted development. Typically, these don't require approval, or the approval's granted automatically if you meet strictly defined quantitative requirements. Let's look at the what we call code assessed, more specifically the performance assessed development, and also the impact assessed development, because that's where realistically most of our projects sit. Performance assessment means that performance of a proposal is assessed on its merits against a defined set of existing policy that's called up by the combination of the site and the proposed land use. In South Australia, we've got a fully digital planning and design code as our policy document where you select the site and the proposed land use and it spits out all of the relevant policy. And the Act is very clear that that is the extent of policy that you can take into account. That's great if you're building a shop, an office, a consulting room, but it breaks down when you come to our sector. We've got a great set of definitions in our legislation for triggering referrals of our projects to the EPA, but those definitions aren't land use definitions for the purpose of calling up policy. So you end up lumped in a category called all other code assessed development, meaning that you've got to sift through loads of policy and find pretty much none that's actually useful to the assessment of your proposal. I could talk a lot about policy, but that's a talk for another day. It also means that you're almost never going to have your project exempted from public notification unless you're located smack bang in the middle of what we in South Australia call a strategic employment zone, so a heavy type industrial zone, and land in those locations is pretty rare. Now, we're almost finished the theory, so let's just quickly touch on our impact assessed development. It means exactly what it says. A proposal's assessed on the basis of the impacts it's going to cause. Less focus on pre-existing policy and broader consideration of the environmental, social and economic outcomes of its implementation. I think here in New South Wales, that's a lot of your state-significant development, where you get SEARs on a project-by-project or sometimes industry basis. So before we head for some case studies, let's look at what I want to take away when we're talking about running development applications. No matter how small, approvals need to be treated these days when they're for complex projects as a campaign, not just a technical development application. You need to operate at multiple levels, including technical assessment, key decision makers, and that can include a political process as well, engagement and social licence. And probably in contrast to the way that applications worked 20 or 30 years ago, great technical proposals frequently aren't enough to get you over the line. If you get a community movement that is against you that gets ongoing traction, you're in a world of pain. And sometimes we see on large projects those community movements are actually AstroTurf campaigns rather than genuine community movements. Case studies, I've got 4 here, only one of which is from our sector, but all of which have common themes and are instructive to the projects that we pursue. Let's start with an example where a controversial project during the assessment process has been totally uncontroversial in operation. In the mid-1990s, we were duplicating the main highway north of Adelaide, the Port Wakefield Highway, and a borrow pit just south of the town of Dublin was spotted by an existing local operator, P. Borelli and Sons as they were at that stage, now IWS, as an opportunity to build a new landfill, noting that existing landfills in northwestern Adelaide at the time were approaching capacity. The project was advanced and was called in as a major development under our then legislation for impact assessment via an EIS by the Minister for Planning. The proposal was less than well received in the community, and a significant campaign by locals was joined by a number of environmental groups. The campaign garnered lots of media attention that was thematically based on the landfill being unnecessary Stone Age technology. We just weren't going to need more landfills. The campaign spurned these beautiful structures erected on the side of Port Wakefield Highway, where they stayed for about 30 years. The signs there were referring to the original proposal, but the signs were actually frequently updated to have a go at whoever was in government at the time. A number of them are still there, many of them have now disappeared, but they included an environmental observer in a watchtower, a UFO, an outhouse, a giant fly and a cockroach. The EIS for the project, despite having one of the worst covers ever to grace a report, you can search it and you might be able to find it. It was my company, but well before I was there. Put forward a powerful technical case for the project and highlighted its importance to the economy of the Greater Adelaide region by ensuring a long-term supply of landfill airspace. The application attracted a then record number of submissions during its public exhibition process, with almost all being opposed to the project. Ultimately approved, the proposal was constructed and it commenced operation in the early 2000s. As is the case for most large landfills in South Australia, the Major Development Declaration remains in place after the facility commences operation, and subsequent variations and expansions are still assessed via that impact assessed process rather than it reverting to regular development applications. Larger variations require an addendum to the original EIS. In operation, the facility's largely borne out the conclusions in the original EIS, having a low complaint history, good environmental outcomes, and adapting to evolving best practice during its operational life. In 2022, a variation to the approval providing for a significant increase in finished height was assessed, with an EIS addendum considering the extent to which the visual outcomes forecast in the original EIS had come to fruition. In summary, pretty much everything that was said was going to happen originally in the EIS that was assessed in the mid-1990s had happened. All of the mitigations had functioned pretty much as they were intended to, and if anything, the performance of the site was exceeding what was initially thought to be the case. That variation to increase the height of the landfill was publicly notified during its assessment, and in contrast to the original application, not a single public submission was received. Interestingly, that fly that you saw before that stood proudly facing the highway for 2 decades was acquired by IWS when they got some additional land adjacent their site. It's now been restored to its blue gleaming glory and sits next to the site office. For an example that's a bit different, let's move away from that and look at a slightly different proposal that had a very straightforward assessment but then caused some issues when it actually got into operation. T-Ports are an innovative operator of grain ports around the Spencer Gulf. Using low draft barges, they transship grain and allow ports to be established for a fraction of the capex of a deepwater port, talking 80 to 120 million versus 800 to 1.2 billion. T-Port's second port at Wallaroo, 170 kilometres northwest of Adelaide, was approved as Crown Development, which is another impact assessment pathway that you didn't see on that diagram before in the South Australian system, that's available to private sector operators of certain facilities that typically used to be operated by the government. During the assessment process, the application was benign, well located next to other industrial development. The proposal garnered minimal public input. Acoustic modelling indicated the proposal would comply with the relevant guidelines for noise impact on the nearby sensitive receivers. However, when the facility was constructed and commissioned, a large number of noise complaints were received by the EPA, by the council and by T-Ports, and were found to trace back to faulty parts in conveyor systems. As this occurred right at the start of the operations, the community considered that the noise that they were experiencing at that point represented what was going to be the new normal for them in the area that they lived. And as a result of that and that sensitisation, significant work's been required to remediate the facility, not just replacing the faulty equipment, but also addressing issues where the modelled noise outputs didn't match the noise outputs in operation. The challenge here is that once you get that sensitisation of the community, it's very challenging to work back from that. And it's important in this case to recognise that where outcomes are assessed on the basis of predictive modelling during application processes, that process isn't perfect. Models have conservatism built in, but they're not always right. And particularly if the assumptions and data that goes into those models, particularly where there's CFD models such as noise and air quality, you can come up with outcomes that are quite a long way away from what happens in practice. Let's move on to a couple of further proposals and explore the scale of opposition to proposals and how that impacts the way that they work their way through the system. Southern Launch is a startup providing launch and return services to the international space community. They're actually got a return of a Varda satellite occurring at their Caniba test range west of Ceduna this afternoon. The Whalers Way Orbital Launch Complex at the southern tip of the Eyre Peninsula provides the only current opportunity in the world to insert payloads into polar orbit from the southern hemisphere. Assessed and approved as a major development and also being a controlled action under the Commonwealth EPBC Act, the proposal was at the extreme end of technical challenge for assessment. The project would have material and unavoidable environmental impacts, including clearance of significant native vegetation and impact on EPBC species listed as vulnerable. This was balanced against the constraints to site selection, meaning that no other realistic site candidate existed. The project attracted strong opposition from local landowners and environmental groups, but also strong support from other groups in the community, both locally on the Eyre Peninsula and more broadly. When the proposal was publicly exhibited, it garnered hundreds of submissions. What was interesting is that the submissions were balanced around 50-50 in opposition to and supportive of the project. And whilst the project garnered a fair bit of attention on social media, and there was a flow over of that into mainstream media, the narrative always remained relatively balanced, noting that there were many people opposed to the proposal, but also significant support. More significantly, whilst visible, there were various groups opposed to the project that were never able to attract huge numbers of supporters. On-site protests were in the tens, not the hundreds, and likes and shares in social media were similarly restrained. The assessment was complex, lengthy and uncertain, and 5 years elapsed between the declaration of the project as a major development and approval of both the development application and the EPBC application. Okay, let's head back to the pub. No more of me in a Santa suit. The Crown and Anchor in the Adelaide CBD, for over 100 years, its core clientele was associated with the adjacent Adelaide produce markets where wholesale fruit, vegetables and flowers were traded in the early mornings. When the market moved out in the 1990s and the site was redeveloped for mixed-use development, the Crown and Anchor, or Cranker as it's colloquially known, carved out a strong niche for live music, serving a number of genres and subcultures, but having a grimy, gritty and undoubtedly authentic feel. My annual visit in the cheap Santa suit, and whilst I'm still a recovering raver from my younger days as a full-on drum and bass addict, no trip to the Cranker failed to open my eyes to people and behaviours I didn't interact with every day. Protecting opportunities for live music has been somewhat of a totemic issue in the gentrification and densification of inner urban areas. So when a proposal emerged in 2024 for the redevelopment of the Cranker site, which extends beyond the hotel itself, that hotel building was listed as a local heritage item, but that listing only extended to the facade that you see in that image. The proposal for student accommodation was true facadism, retained the facade, but would have seen the end of the operation of the hotel in the form that it was known. So, cue the outrage. Save the Cranker became a massive refrain dominating our South Australian news cycle. Thousands of likes, shares and follows, tens of thousands of people, many of whom had either never been to the Cranker or hadn't been there for a long time, were in on the campaign because they were able to feel the way in which what was happening to that particular pub could happen to other locations. It was the thin end of the wedge. In our relentless 24-hour news cycle, the issue would flare up, it would settle, it would flare up again. Now, credit where credit's due when it comes to campaigns. The Save the Cranker campaign was sublimely run and advanced a set of themes that were persuasive and easy for people to connect with. So, enter the Premier. What we got was special purpose legislation that turned the proposal from the one you see on the left-hand side, where the facade of the original building's visible at the bottom, to the one on the right-hand side, which is almost twice as high, contains the same floor area, but preserves the pub. What's most interesting is this was done via special purpose legislation. Just turn off the planning system, come up with something that's basically an indenture act, and apply that to a single project. Ultimately, that's a reflection of the fact that politics sits over the top of everything we do in planning and development. The campaign got enduring traction with something like 6% of the South Australian population interacting with it, and a load of famous musicians with big social media platforms doing the same. The campaign was large enough, clear enough and enduring enough to ensure that the government, who's ultimately responsible to the people at the ballot box, saw the direction the wind was blowing. Now, our Premier in South Australia can't be accused of being indecisive, and at the moment he's got a fair bit of political capital. So when he puts forward a direction that allows both sides to win and says that's how it's going to happen, that's how it happened. So taking that and coming back to social licence, because that was very much a question of social licence. Social licence is a really complex thing. It can mean different things to different stakeholders. But the key common understanding of it is the need for projects, industries and sectors of the economy to operate in a manner that they're sufficiently tolerated by the community. How you build and maintain social licence is different in every case, which takes us back to the need to treat every project as a bespoke campaign, which requires a multi-pronged approach approach to deliver. So when we look at these projects that got various levels of public interaction during their assessment process, how many people spells doom for a project? How many people do you need to object before it's just never going to happen? Well, really, it might only be a few % of whatever the relevant population is. Now, moving off of planning, I'd take you to an analysis for about 15 years ago by political scientist Erica Chenoweth, looking at the success of mass movement campaigns intended to achieve social and political change. That found that when you had campaigns that mobilised around 3.5% of a population, people actively participating in the campaign, it was almost certain that they'd achieve their goals. That's going to be a bit hard to read, but this isn't talking about people objecting to development applications, it's talking about overthrowing governments, even remarkably heretic ones. Want to get rid of a dictator? You get 3.5% of the population out on the streets, and history says that change isn't just likely, it's close to certain. But what's more important than this is working out, when you actually see people objecting to your proposals, what's going on behind the scenes. So what Erica Chenoweth said is that if the movement's mobilising 3.5% or more of the population, there are likely much larger proportions of the population who sympathise with and support that movement. And that's really the crux of the matter, that for every person you actually see out there, there's a lot more people behind the scenes that support what it is those people are standing for. She's got a great TEDx speech if you want to understand more. Taking this back to a local level, the question's how you define your population. For development proposals, maybe it's the jurisdiction. Is it the local authority? Is it state significant? What's the spatial extent of the impacts and externalities of the proposal? Now, I don't know whether 3.5% is the definitive number when it comes to these type of development proposals, but it would seem there's a clear threshold above which sustained and visible campaigns become impossible for the decision makers, particularly elected politicians, to ignore. Once you breach that threshold, from the perspective of the proponent, you lose control of the process. And whilst you can still manage your own messaging and actions, often that's not going to be enough. The message I want to leave you with here is that when it comes to impact assessments of proposals that have significant potential for adverse amenity or environmental impacts, or an ability to sensitise the public, as a proponent, you've got to be ahead of the curve. You need to take a clear posture to mitigate regulatory risks early in the project life cycle, as in at the time the project's conceived, not after a site's been selected and not after the design's been completed. If you've done those two things already before you start thinking about how you're going to work your project through regulatory processes, it's really too late. Good regulatory processes start with site selection that involves multiple sites. Ensure you've got strategies to communicate and engage at all levels: communities, stakeholders, technocrats, and key decision makers. Social licence is built, it doesn't just emerge. But most importantly, stress test your proposals, know your strengths and weaknesses, and work out the issues and techniques that those who might be opposed to your projects will deploy. Pre-identify the items on which you can compromise and those on which you can't. In the examples I've touched on here and many more, there's frequently not a lot of correlation between projects that are controversial in their regulatory approval processes and what happens following implementation. On the whole, what we see as being quite dramatic during regulatory approval processes frequently turn out to be very benign once they're actually implemented. No matter how small, it's critical to actually treat your approval processes as a holistic campaign where you're going to engage with a broad array of stakeholders using a huge number of techniques, not just as a technical exercise. If you do that, you're maximising the probability that not only are you going to get an approval, but you're going to have a project that actually works once you finish it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. What an interesting presentation with the 4 examples that you brought together. I've got some questions for you about social licence, and we'll take those questions at the end. Next, we have Justin Frank from GoTerra, who's going to talk to us about some lived experiences in getting applications through. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. Not quite rocket ships, but very sexy, first-of-a-kind innovation, deep tech, climate tech, also known as maggot robots. So we'll tell you how we got maggot robots to scale and how we've bridged the gap between first-of-a-kind innovation and regulation to do that. Sorry, I'll get the hang of that. Just before we do, I'm sure you've heard some of these stats before. Food waste is one of the largest problems that we as human beings create that can actually solve. Food waste represents 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, 3% for Australia. If it was a country, it would be the third biggest emitter of CO2 equivalent emissions after the United States and China. So if there's one thing that we can get out of landfills and should do, it's food waste. It costs the Australian economy over $36 billion a year. Prices are going up with landfill levies and legislation. Rural communities are getting left behind. We're seeing landfills like Jindabyne, Cooma, and others getting full, and then trucking and Scope 3 emissions increases as we go to metro landfills, which are also running out of room, with Sydney's landfills to be predicted to be running out by 2030, also Perth not far behind. New sites take too long. The irony of that is that we're actually facing a food production shortfall, predicted to be 20% as a minimum by 2050. So we're wasting all of that food, 7 million tonnes just in Australia a year, and by 2050, there's going to be a 20% food shortfall. We have to do better. We've got to find other sources of protein. We've got to find more sovereign safety around fertilizers, and we have to find alternative ways of feeding our livestock. Otherwise, we'll have a problem. Australia will probably be all right because we're the lucky country, but there'll be lots of other countries that aren't, and that's just due to population growth, burgeoning middle classes in countries like India, China, Indonesia, all wanting more protein, and there just isn't going to be enough. So for those of you who don't know who GoTerra is, we harness the power of black soldier fly larvae along with robotics. We take food waste both clean at on-site customers like Barangaroo Lendlease in Sydney, the Hyatt Regency in Sydney, Melbourne Airport, where we have a unit on-site dealing with the clean food waste, predominantly clean food waste from cafeterias and retailers that generate it. We also have aggregated sites, so our Hume headquarters, where we take retailer food waste in, which is both packaged and fresh produce, and we process it through deep packaging technology. We have one at Albury City Council, who've been a wonderful leader in trailblazer in trialling the technology. And we also just have a recent one with the City of Sydney, but they're going to be talking about that tomorrow. The food waste gets basically macerated and then fed by hydraulics and robots into the top of the MIB. And it's not Men in Black, it's modular infrastructure for biological services. So effectively a retrofitted refrigerated container, high density racking, 340 trays that get moved around by robots to feeding stations, tens of thousands of larvae, so about 30,000 larvae in each tray, that start munching away voraciously and promiscuously, which I always get told not to say because I've got a lisp, but I'll give it a red hot crack every time. They eat it and they poo it out, which is called frass. So frass is maggot shit. They're the two sustainable byproducts that come from the food waste. You have an insect protein, highly sought after, we have more demand than we can supply, and frass, which is effectively an insect manure. It's not classed as an insect manure, it's classed as a compost, and it has to be composted to the standard, and it can go either straight to agriculture or as a compost blend. And for green waste composters, any green waste composters in the room, it is a supercharger if you add it in as a mix. At the end of the cycle, our service techs take out the trays, they take the fat, juicy, mature larvae and frass, tip them into IBCs, reseed them with neonates, so 3 to 5 day old larvae. In it goes, takes about 2 hours, close the doors and the system repeats itself. The larvae and the frass are taken to our hubs, so it's a hub and spoke model. They are separated, frass is sent for composting, larvae are washed, slaughtered ethically, and then cooked, basically. And then they're sold to poultry, both eggs and meat production, aquaculture, a huge market for aquaculture and fish meal, but also pet food as well is the other market. It is a restricted animal material, so it can't go to ruminants or pigs. So that's maggots in a box in a couple of minutes, and you can all talk about it tonight in your 80s outfits and be put off your dinner. So disruption requires more than technology. So the operation, I think the opportunity everyone's happy that circular economy is getting more traction, that it's getting the headlines, that legislation's following is great. There is NIMBYism. We feel that we solved for that, so that's not one of the obstacles here. But first-of-a-kind innovation is definitely outpacing the systems that are designed to regulate it, and it's a real challenge for a startup that is trying to scale up, and it can be critically wounding if we're not careful. The regulators, innovators and councils are being asked to interpret the new technology and business models through the old lenses and frameworks, which doesn't really work. I empathise and sympathise with those that have to deal with the first-of-a-kind innovation, but we've got to do it much, much more efficiently than we are if we want to really change the status quo and be a more innovative nation when it comes to waste processing. So what does that really look like? So most environmental laws are written with that traditional centralised lens, not a decentralised lens. The GoTerra model, or models like it, are both a centralised hub, but with lots of decentralised spokes. So we can actually put the solution where the waste is being generated, which for some of your larger tier 1 customers that have neighbours rating or green building rating can really help them because they're reducing their scope 3 significantly. Critically, the food waste isn't classed as food waste because what leaves the premises is a live larvae and an insect frass, but we don't neatly fit into a box. Regulatory uncertainty slows progress more than the technical readiness does, and the misalignment creates risk for all. How does it play out? Well, delayed approvals, which I'll talk about, site unavailability, greenfield disadvantages, we've got a good case study on that, classification difficulty for new outputs like frass, and then the lack of investment due to perceived risk, which then threatens the success and scale up of something that is now highly sought after. So taking that greenfield case study, so Wetherell Park, building a blank slate. So if you look at the top right, that is actually the industrial precinct that we work on. Believe it or not, in Unit 3, which is the second from the left, that is actually now a food processing, waste processing facility right in the heart of Wetherell Park. It took all the full court press of engagement with the regulators, council, DA, EPA, the challenges we had to go through the EIS, we had to look at dust, odour, traffic, specifically odour though, and we had to prove compliance with a non-traditional tech. The EPA, I feel in the room there's a bit of tension with the EPA. I just want to put it out here, they've been absolutely fantastic. They've been a really strong support about trying to get new technology through to plug the infrastructure gap, and there is a very pressing infrastructure gap that we believe we can help plug. Councils, the council in question here, I won't name who it is, didn't do anything wrong, but definitely struggled with the approval process in the DA with the first of a kind. We weren't faultless. We didn't understand all the regulations well enough or the process. Once we got a consultant involved who did, things went a lot smoother. There's a picture of car parking spaces there, in wet car parking spaces, because I measured them in the rain, because we lost 2 months of approval of the site because of those car parking spaces. Car parking spaces that were already there, we didn't place them there. They were just wrong on the site plans, which we also didn't do because they were also there, but we lost 2 months, toing and froing, 14-day cycle to the council, 14-day response time back, 14-day response time. You just burn time, which burns money when you've got a site that you're paying rent for in Wetherell Park that you can't actually take any waste in. Very, very painful for a scale-up. It's not scarred me, I promise, but I certainly don't want to be measuring car parking spaces in the rain again. And then we lost another month because the sweat paths were then wrong, so we had to go through that. I think councils need more support in this area. The examples that I think work quite well are the special activation precincts where you have concierge, assistance both for the council but also for the proprietor that's trying to bring something through. I think that's a very useful model that can help both parties navigate some of the uncertainty. The other piece that has worked for us is building trust. It's not always pleasant when you have to give bad news, but it's important to be transparent and honest. First adopters are absolutely crucial advocates. So The likes of Lend-Lease JLL, the likes of Albury City Council, taking the innovation, being those trailblazers, those first adopters, and then being very, very generous with their time to let tours come through and see it, are absolutely crucial for new, first-of-a-kind deep tech to get approved. A bit like Uber, if you think about it, you know, the legislation and the regulation hadn't caught up, but the adoption really drove a change that had to happen. We're not an Uber by any change, but we are trying to disrupt a very traditional waste system that I used to work in the corporate space at Suez. Early engagement with the EPA and councils is also critical. Like I said, the EPA have been absolutely really supportive. They've come to the sites. Our older site isn't ideal because we have neighbours very close by, and it's old tech. The new sites, you wouldn't even know that they are there. Our newest site has sensitive receptors less than 100 metres away in an inner city setting, and we've had 0 odour complaints because we know how to solve for that. Transparency with data and third-party assessments is actually absolutely critical, so getting the odour reports out there, the traffic management reports, which are quite painful actually. So just to change the traffic management plan and the opening hours of a facility is a 3-month process. And again, from a startup that's trying to scale up, that has more demand than it can supply, both on the front end and the back end, it's a frustrating and painful problem. Getting frustrated about it, though, I can tell you does not help. It does not speed you through. It probably just delays it. Trial projects like the City of Sydney are absolutely critical for proving that things can be done. The legislation that's just been passed in terms of the FOGO recycling bill has created a wave of demand that, again, we are struggling to keep up with. And having, again, absolutely sustainably minded, trailblazing councils like the City of Sydney using our technology really shows that it can be done, and people are prepared to try something a bit harder, and then realising it's not hard. Bringing the circular economy to life, so actually showing that it does work, is critical. The picture there at the Hyatt Regency. So the Hyatt Regency is the largest hotel in Australia. It's got over 900 rooms on Sussex Street in the city. We have a unit in the dock, which is a very small dock and a very busy dock for a big hotel. We process all the food waste there. The food waste is then treated the same way as the system that I went through. The larvae goes to their chicken supplier or egg supplier. The chickens eat the larvae, lay the eggs, and the eggs go back to the breakfast table. The circle is complete. So always looking for things like that. And then communicating the wins and the challenges. So the picture of our fearless leader in a waste throne is definitely clickbait in the AFR, just to show that there are challenges out there. So another fun fact for you, 3.5 billion was raised for Aussie startups in 2023, similar amount last year. 4% went to female founders, which is really, really shit. We've got to do better as a country. We've got some brilliant female leaders out there with brilliant ideas, and they need to be supported if we are going to change the needle quickly. We can scale up very, very quickly. Our latest site went from finding the site through approval in roughly 9 months. The Wetherill Park site, with all of the shenanigans around DA approval, which was equally as our fault as it was the council's, was still 2 years, which in New South Wales is pretty unheard of. And now that we've been operating for the best part of half a year with no complaints from our neighbours, which are literally either side of us, we'll look to increase the capacity there. So closing the infrastructure gap, again, the bill that has been passed is fantastic. I am concerned, though, that the demand versus supply is going to cause a mad scramble for the capacity. We are going to drive inefficient vehicle miles up to Forbes and out to the ACT. And we need to do better to make sure that the system will match that demand. To close the gap, I was here with Suez presenting, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. It's the same soapbox that I'll get on. The waste levies need to be used better. They should be used as an economic instrument to stimulate innovation that drives a circular economy. There's not enough of that. There's plenty of revenues that come out of it. The funding isn't there. or it isn't there quick enough, and then the actual process to get the funding also takes months and months and months and months, which from a startup perspective is another nail in the coffin if you're not careful. Accelerating the approvals with clear national pathways for circular technologies, enabling land access, that's a real challenge for a startup. A lot of the big boys and girls in the waste industry already have the land parcels that you can easily amend your DAs on. Not all of the big boys and girls want to play nicely in the sandpit because they're competing for the same source, that they want to make their larger facilities more efficient. So that's a challenging thing to overcome. So we're always looking for those co-location partners where you have co-location like we have with our Albury City Council stack or our latest stack with the City of Sydney. You can move through the planning process a lot quicker because you already have a waste licence to work with and you already have parameters, so it's a much quicker process than a greenfield site. And finally, better aligning that regulation with innovation. That's what we have to do. So, Maggot robots, maggots in a box, munching on food waste and saving the world one MIB at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Fascinating technology. I look forward to not discussing that with you over dinner, but fascinating nonetheless. Next we have Peter Skicluna. Peter's from Liverpool City Council, the Acting Director of Operations, including the circular economy. Thanks, Peter.
So good afternoon all. I'm here to take you on our journey. And without further ado, I will commence. Where did we start? We started with a problem. We recognised that around 1.8 million mattresses a year are discarded. For us, that was a significant problem at Liverpool because we contributed 20,000 mattresses per annum and it was costing us $800,000 a year to do. And the picture tells the story. If we were to put them end to end, it would stretch from Darwin to the tip of Tasmania, which is quite significant as a problem. The other thing that you would all know, mattresses are difficult to get rid of. They're made up of various component parts, and even though we might take them to a recycling centre, a large portion, so somewhere between 44 and 64% by our research, still ends up in landfill, regardless of us trying to have those recycled. That sits at about just over 22,000 tonnes of mattresses go into landfill per annum. It's quite significant. It creates subsidence issues with land in itself. And the other thing, and the last point, which I think is the most important, is that because of the composition of a mattress, it can take up to 100 years for it to break down once it goes into landfill. That's quite significant. What you see here is a 3D render. So this is our site at 600 Cow Pasture Road in Hoxton Park. On the top right-hand part of that picture, you'll see that is our state-of-the-art circular economy education centre. So what that will enable us to do is have an education centre where school kids, universities can participate in, and we will hold circular economy events, including workshops and forums and a whole range of sessions. The other thing, what you can see with the coloured tiles at the front there, we currently operate a community recycling centre at our Rose Street depot in Liverpool. This will do a couple of things for us. First of all, it will give us another one, which is a little bit further west in our LGA. Our LGA is about 34 kilometres and it goes from the Georges River to the Nepean River. So we're pretty much split by a very developed portion to the east and still not so much to the west. So this will enable us to then service our LGA a little better. The big white building, I'm about to show you a picture which will tell you what will be in that. But that is our current site and I will tell you where we're up to with that. At the moment, what we are looking at in terms of our circular economy centre, see the processing facility, and I'll tell you what will be in that in a little while. The other thing which is really important for us, and I'm going to show you what we have set up, and it's in partnership with the University of New South Wales and also another private enterprise called Kandui. And I'll show you what we're doing there as well. But that just gives you an idea of what is on this particular site. What we have done is quite a number of things. So a high-level project plan, and the green ticks tell you what has been delivered as opposed to what we still need to do. But within that large white building, what we intend to do is have up to 3 industrial shredders operating. We have 2 at the moment, and 1 operates out of the Rose Street depot, and I'll give you some details around that. The microfactory, and the microfactory is operational as I stand here today. It also enabled us to upscale our mobile workshop. So it doesn't only deal with our waste fleet of trucks, but all of our other large plant. So as you would be in councils, you have a lot of plant related to parks, open spaces, and also a lot of civil work equipment and some smaller plant. So that all now gets serviced out of that particular location. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, it will enable us to create that state-of-the-art education centre. We then also moved our teams out there. So our operational waste team moved there, our mechanics moved there, and also our circular economy team also moved there. There's a truck wash. What we are doing with the truck wash, we have put an order in to upgrade our truck wash with a new state-of-the-art facility. So by Christmas this year, it will operate on a commercial basis. So it will be made available to the public. It's about 600 metres away from the M7, and what we intend to do then is make it available to the public and to wash trucks, buses, and a whole range of other things. So it'll be another commercial opportunity for the council. And the other thing that has been designed, or part of planning and design, will be if we need to have a weighbridge, it will also be involved in there. So what do we have? We have the mattresses, we have the steel, and of course we have the flock. What matters on this particular diagram is the larger box at the bottom. What that tells you, and if you can't read it, I'll just read a few of them out to you, but what products we're able to then manufacture or process the mattress and then manufacture. So what it refers to are civic quality street pavers, blocks, street furniture, tiles, toilet dividers, so cubicles, the walls in cubicles, seats and tables, some public artwork, and also fill for boxing gloves and also the big punching bags and stuff. The other thing we're doing at the moment, we have a number of large projects, as all of you would have, but we are also now working with the designers, and our aim is to have 25% of our buildings now made with our mattress flock and products that we're processing. So whether it ends up being walls, and they're also, as part of some further research, looking to also test structural beams being made out of mattresses. And there's a whole lot of science to that. I'm not the scientist, but that's what they are doing, which is quite impressive. So that is our Croc character. What this speaks to is our current capacity operating in Rose Street. So we can process up to 114 mattresses per day. So we have a combination of where we go and collect mattresses. So the community would ring up and book a mattress collection, but we also have mattresses dropped off. We also have some arrangements whereby we deliver what we call a Croc cage to other councils, and then their community put the mattresses into that cage, and we then go and collect that cage and process it. On site at the moment, we're able to keep up to 1,300 mattresses without the need for any further licence. We can operate 10 hours a day, 6 days per week, where we are at the moment, and that gives us the capacity to do over 250,000 mattresses per year. And that pretty much will take care of a large portion of the mattress challenges that we have within the Sydney Basin. The other thing that I think is important is when you look at who we have entered into commercial arrangements with, it's not only councils, but it's also contractors and private enterprise. and we're continuing to also do that. So a lot of hard work done by the team to get us here, and they are all here today. So what is our current recovery? So sharing a few more statistics with you. So in terms of high tensile steel, 40 to 44% of that is recovered. The other thing, and it is, process engineered fuel. So we're also doing that, and what we are using that product for is that it is being used as a fuel source for kilns in South Australia. So that gets us to a current diversion rate and helps with our WASM targets and anybody that we are in a commercial arrangement with, but the current diversion rate is 96%. And on the next slide, I'll show you where we're up to on some other stuff. But with future, we are aiming to get closer to that 100%, which is important. Our partnership with the University of New South Wales. So this is an example of a tile. So it's pretty sturdy, pretty hardy. So we have used this in a number of our office locations as floor tiles and also benches. So we started to manufacture these last week out of 600 Cow Pasture Road. They are available now, and we are continuing to deliver other products as part of what the group has set up. So it's a partnership between Liverpool City Council, the University of New South Wales, and a company called Kandui. Some questions we were asked to answer. So how did we get from inception? So somebody had the idea, and Tim Pasley, who is our manager of circular economy, had this idea 5 years ago. It started with us then looking at where can we do this sort of work. You have a genesis of an idea, and as Michael mentioned earlier, you've got to think about, well, we can have the best idea, but where can we put it? Where does it make sense? Where will we be able to deliver what the vision is? So we had acquisition of a property, and it was a bus depot, and I'll share with you the zoning details. Planning and then preparation of the development application. We moved in our mechanical workshop. We relocated our waste team, our circular economy team, and that was part of where we began. But some other things that were really important as well, because none of these are easy. There's been a lot of hurdles, a lot of roadblocks, and some objections to what was trying to be done. As I said, Tim started this project 5 years ago, and through leadership of Tim, also with who I am currently standing in for, Jason Breton, he then took the project up with Tim, got it over the line, convinced council to make the investment in the industrial shredders, and also then all the other infrastructure that was required for us to solve not only our mattress problem, but move towards circularity. And so some other things were in that, but I think the important part is, and Tim does say to me often, that we just need to continue to be persistent. There are going to be roadblocks, it does take time, and I've learned that lesson over and over again, certainly coming into a council. So there is a gap that exists. The state's intention about going to circularity, that whole aspect, and what is available through policy at the moment. And I will share with you some examples of that. First of which is, circular economy is not a defined use within planning. So what does it mean? And then you have the dichotomy that exists between something that has a negative connotation, which is called waste. Nobody wants waste in their backyard. Nobody wants it anywhere near them. And the other part is then we look at it as a resource, because we are taking a waste product, we recognise it as a resource, we process, and it enables us to manufacture. So, because there is that challenge at the moment in understanding what is circular economy and how we can then move down the path that we have, we are actually going down the route of saying we are manufacturing. We're not setting up a waste facility for circular economy because we have some challenges in that way. So the team has found a way to move forward. As it was mentioned earlier, if you get in the right consultants and support people who also can help and support on these journeys, it's quite important. Some other examples, define as waste, what does it mean? It has a whole lot of regulatory and compliance requirements. If we use the word waste, there's nothing positive about it, it's negative in that way. Whereas if we say we are going to use it as a resource, it has that positive connotation, the sustainability aspect, and that gives us the opportunity to do what we need to do. So, definitions certainly help. This is our site. It is zoned E4 General Industrial Zone. So we can have a depot there, and we can also have an industrial activity, which enables us to process. So we will be going down the path of processing in order to manufacture what I've shown you here. We do have some challenges because it is in a flood zone. Again, the team is dealing with that, but we will continue to move through that. What was the process that we followed? No, there was a vision. A vision happened a long time before I arrived at council. And all of those other attributes and characteristics of the people involved in this to get us to where we are today, that was important. Planning, finding the zoned land and what the permitted use might be, the development application, and that's an ongoing process for us, and then making sure with the development application we're clear on what it is and that we also then comply with what the regulations require. What would we be able to do better in the current planning pathways? Certainly we believe some definitions around what is waste, because if it's deemed to be waste, it triggers some more unnecessary strict planning requirements, and then for us, regulatory controls. The other thing, if we talk about what it is we do, we take a mattress, and it can be in any form, we process the mattress, we get the steel gets sold to the recyclers, and the flock is used for the product that I showed you earlier. But it's all just packaged up, and if it is called waste, it's then deemed to be high risk. So for us, what we believe is there is a better way that can be defined, and that we can have different categories of what might be defined as waste and dealt with in a different way. The other part we think that is really important is looking at what we are trying to do or what you might have plans to do, and also then align that to the waste hierarchy. Not just think that is all about disposal, as opposed to then looking at whether we can reuse something or whether we can recycle something. And the last part then is that we look at what it is we are doing, and the environmental agencies who have been supportive for Liverpool Council in a number of ways as well, be able to align so that we can get ultimately to deliver the vision that we have. That's just the Ishikawa diagram or the fishbone, whichever way you might happen to know it. I'm not going to talk you through that, but what that identifies are where are the challenges that we have faced, and we recognise the various risks, and we've had to deal with those and address them. Sorry? I don't know if I jumped 2 screens. Anyway, maybe it's the afternoon. It's getting a bit tired. All right, so some other suggestions. So as I touched on, refining what is actually waste, and defining what that is, but also aligning that with some common sense exceptions for what might be lower risk waste products if we're going to stay in that particular way. Having those different classes of waste, of course, waste has that negative connotation, but they're all forms of waste. And I don't know about where you all might come from, but every time we put a shovel in the ground, we hit asbestos, or we hit some other soil contamination, or some lead, or PFAS, and a whole bunch of other things, right? So we're all up against that. So having some categories that recognise that what we might be trying to process and then use for manufacturing could be in a different class, which I think is important. If we then are able to define what is circular economy, then what that will enable us to do is then accurately submit a permit, define what it is we are doing, and then enable us to comply with what that might be. We've taken a different route for the reasons that I have shared with you, because that's what we need to do right now. But these are some suggestions that we might be able to improve. And the other thing that I think is important is the last bit there, and you all understand the SEP versus local planning. Where are the challenges? What matters more? How can we improve the relationship between the two? Sorry? Two? Yeah, this is the last slide. Okay. The last thing, what remains to be done? We need to deal with the flood risk. Okay, so again, and it's greater than 1 in 100 year. I mean, Tim said to me the other day, it's not even close to that, Pete. It's far, far higher. So, but anyway, we need to do that. Make sure that we're clear in our DA around what it is that we are doing. It's processing into manufacturing. Once we get the DA, we'll go through the part where we will then get a construction certificate. We will then start the works and continue around what is a live environment site. The site won't be shutting down. We will do that. And the other thing I think that is important is that it will ultimately be a landmark site once everything that I've shown you here today is in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, for speaking so frankly about the problem with the waste definition and the expansive nature of it and the implications and difficulties that creates. Be interested to see how your project assessment pathway goes. Finally, we have Tasneem Rangwala to speak to us. She's from JEP Environment and Planning and is going to be talking to us about the particular issues involved in modifying an existing consent or approval. Thanks, Tasneem.
Thank you, everyone. And I totally understand I'm between you and the drinks, so I'll try to be as quick as I can. Beautiful. So I begin overview of the presentation. I will talk about the policy drivers, the need for waste infrastructure, planning pathways, and the regulatory systems. Excuse my pronunciations. Challenges in developing waste and recycling infrastructure, strategies to overcome these challenges, and a few examples. I will also talk about the overall benefits of upgrading existing resource recovery facilities and the broader benefits of the facilities. So who are we? JEP is a specialist infrastructure planning firm, and we do a lot of C&D and C&I sorting and processing facilities. The need for waste infrastructure. And we've seen today and heard a lot about how much waste is generated and why do we need waste infrastructure. And there is a huge capacity gap for processing. And I will just talk about the waste disposal. We are going to be short of landfills by 2030. We've talked about that. And these are some stats around some selected waste streams where under the ideal scenarios, the capacity gaps would be massive. And so the policy drivers, again, the regulations, we've heard a lot about that. So I will skip that too. I'll talk about the planning and regulatory system in New South Wales. So the application and the application process is categorized in three major categories: is the local, the designated, and the state significant development. And they are depending on the tonnages of the waste processed in that particular category. The documentation requirements is the statement of environmental impacts for a local development, and EIS for, and EIS for designated development, and an EPA license for state significant development as well. It's EIS and environmental protection license. However, the assessing authority for the local government is the Council for the designated development, it's the regional planning panel, and for the state significant developments, it's the minister or the planning commission. These are some of the other categories, and the waste tonnages are on the screen, you can see, and it's got all the stats around what are the documentation requirements, what's the licensing requirements, and what that entails is that this process takes so long, and we've heard a couple of times now that it takes anywhere between 2 to 6 years, and we just heard from GoTerra that a simple thing like a car park would take anywhere between 2 months, or just a truck turning path would take 3 to 4 months. So it takes time. So these are some of the challenges, challenges in developing a waste and recycling infrastructure in New South Wales, and particularly in the metropolitan Sydney. What happens is there is limited site availability. And if there is, then the affordability is another big factor. Strong competition between the buyers for the industrial properties and other commercial buyers is massive. So again, they drive the prices up, and which makes it even less affordable for people who really want to go and get a site. And we've heard previously that site selection is important, but in Greater Metropolitan Sydney, we have to just work with what we have and not go for a site selection, find out the perfect site, because that's never going to happen in Greater Metropolitan Sydney. Diverse community views on waste and recycling facilities. Again, NIMBY approach. People do not really want a waste facility, even though they want the recycling to happen, they don't really want it near their properties. And of course, they consider every waste facility to have odor issues, where a lot of these would not even have odor issues or even noise issues. And I just talked about the residential areas, people not really talking like, not accepting the waste facilities within their area. And another issue is sensitive receptors. So the environmentally sensitive receptors and the social sensitive receptors are another major issue when we are processing the applications, putting up, and when there is a community engagement. Even though there is thorough community engagement and there are controls in place, people don't really want it. And then resistance from the consent authorities in approving new innovative projects is a big thing. So how do we overcome some of the challenges? Some strategies to better manage the throughputs are expanding and enhancing existing facilities. They're already there, upgrade them and move and help people enclose the facilities so people and the communities, local communities, understand that yes, it will be an enclosed facility. It will kind of help overcome a lot of noise, dust, and other environmental issues. Increasing in the operating hours and improving the efficiency of the operations. So and I'll talk about those examples in the next slides. So better site utilization, increasing the GFAs of the operation, and relocating truck parking off-site. Some of the facilities, even now, they have truck parking on site. If we move that to another site and better utilize the site within the Greater Metropolitan Sydney, that would help. Improved environmental management and performance, having better controls, putting up better best management practice systems in place helps. And of course, repurposing. Some of our projects have been repurposing, so just sorting at one place and then moving the processing to another site. which helps break down that the full-scale impact of the facility. And expanding the footprint of the facility again, getting a neighboring site if we can, and then go ahead with that. So Grima Recycling was one of the expansion and enhancements. Originally, it was approved for 27,000 tons per annum, paper and cardboard baling line installed. And what we did here was, on the site, it was just a shed. We extended the shed in the front and then had another undercover storage facility and separated the chemicals from the actual storage of the materials, and which helped better manage the site. They also started accepting plastics, and then the tonnages were almost tripled to 75,000 tons. Another one is A1 Skips in Tweed, and this is in a flood zone. However, the site is enclosed, and there is it was only approved for 6,000 tons per annum, but we improved the way the processing worked internally within the site, changing the layout of how it operated, and then having the outdoor storage areas and undercover, so that does not impact on, so if there's rain, then it does not wash the materials. It's C&D material processing facility, so any waste, any sediment running into the stormwater would be affected. And we got the approval for almost 2.5 times, that's 15,000 tons per annum at the same facility. For Bingo Industries, we upgraded the operations to 24/7, and what this did was we could break down the traffic impacts and the materials movement from one site to another, the bulk load outs, as it's called. And what that did was the overall benefits, environmental benefits, traffic management, stormwater management, visual impacts, definitely a lot of improvement about visual impacts because everything is enclosed, so that minimizes the waste, the direct view of the waste. Dust mitigation, we installed sprinklers and misting systems internally, so the health benefits also were realized. Noise control measures, fire and safety, and then the environmental benefits. Because we are processing materials and getting that, we are reducing the need for virgin excavated natural materials and reducing the carbon emissions as well because it's associated with a new development. And of course, it promotes circular economy, kind of a resource recovery facility, putting the waste back into the system. Economic benefits, reducing the need for new land, which is rare in metropolitan Sydney, and job creation in the area. And of course, there are always social benefits where people start looking at waste facilities and start being more accepting of the facilities, and promotes the environmental recycling behaviors as the norm. And oops. Oh, thank you.
If I can invite our panellists up to the stage for questions. Are there any questions from the floor? Frank?
I have a question to the gentleman from Liverpool City Council, saying that they struggled with the definition of circular economy and waste. Now, in obtaining your planning approvals, the law is pretty clear, as I would have thought, and Jennifer may correct me if I'm wrong there, but a waste is a waste is a waste. So if you shred your mattresses, you are doing waste processing. You can define it as circular economy as much as you like, but it's still a waste. So how does that impact your development approval and your licensing requirements?
Call in an expert. Phone a friend.
Okay. My name's Carl Adderley. I'm in resource recovery at Liverpool City Council. I work under Peter and under my boss Tim. The journey we've been on with this DA is that obviously, as you pointed out, there's a pretty all-consuming definition of waste. It is a problem. We have worked very hard, and we've spoken to the Minister for Planning, who was very supportive and could clearly see what we were trying to do. There is no definition of circular economy as it pertains to local planning, as you'd probably be aware, and as anybody who's in local government here, you'd had the same problem because basically nobody's got the definition of circular economy in their LEP. However, what we were advised was that if we were to place it entirely under remanufacturing, that such a move was supportable, and that's what we proceeded with. So we've taken it entirely from the point of view of being remanufacturing. So light industrial uses will in fact cope with that. The EPA has indicated that they are happy to approve it on the basis that it is a remanufacturing facility.
Wow. Well, we have to frame that. We have to take that sentence. You have to take that sentence, frame it, and publish it, because that would be bloody new.
As I say, this is the advice that we've been given. We did in fact approach the Minister and also various sources at the EPA who have assured us that that is a viable planning pathway.
Mike, you're busting to say something.
Yeah. Mike Ritchie, MRA Consulting. Carl, stay there.
Okay, Mike.
To be clear, you haven't actually lodged the development consent and the licence application, is that correct?
The DA is just about to go in, Mike.
Okay, so there hasn't been approval. It would be a scene-setting change to waste definitions if that was approved. So I wish you well. I would like you to present next year at this conference on exactly how you've gone on that process, because that would be a redefinition of waste from waste processing to manufacture. And look, it can be done, but you have to be absolutely at the margins of waste, of the definition for the EPA to consider it. It has to be not waste.
Well, just to add a little bit of colour to that, we did in fact make some inquiries with the Department of Planning, and they said that there was a similar. They couldn't give us exact details because there was certain, I guess, confidentiality issues that they had to observe. But we were told that it has been done successfully in that zone with the same sort of site restrictions as we are facing.
I think
So we are strongly anticipating that we will get this through.
I think that there's a distinction to be made between the definition of waste in the planning regime, where there is none, except under certain circumstances, and in the environmental licensing regime, where the definition is quite expansive. So maybe that's the answer to the question. Anyway, sorry. Yeah.
I think you've just hit the nail on the head there, and I'm not as familiar with your definitions as those that I deal with most of the time in South Australia. But the question from a planning perspective when we're going through the development application is I completely accept that the definitions of waste and that very expansive definition and then what you're doing for the purpose of licensing needs to go down to a more granular level so that it can adequately define and then license the operations. But for the purpose of a planning application, those definitions don't necessarily gel well. Many of the things that we do, and I think the one that we've had described here at Liverpool, if you look at the definition of what constitutes industry, it fits every day under the definition of an industry, but it's an industry that's dealing with a waste product as an input. And so from a planning perspective, when we deal with other types of industries that have all sorts of environmental and amenity externalities, there's no difference in the way that we go about those planning assessments. It's not special just because it's waste. It's not necessarily harder or easier than assessing applications for other things. It's just different because it's dealing with waste. And so there needs to be alignment between definitions for the purposes of understanding what the proposal is, but planning often deals with much broader land use categories.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Anyone else? Any other questions? Can we get a microphone? Do you want to introduce yourself and stand up?
Hi, I'm Archana. I'm also under Peter and Tim. I'm the coordinator of Circular Economy, and I just wanted to add a joke that in that planning document, the planners had issue that our team is called Waste, and they didn't want waste. So it's funny, unfortunately. I understand what you're saying, but in terms of planning, they said it's not the waste that they have issue with, it's the use of the process. And as you very correctly said, they had issue with that site being marked or labeled as a waste facility. It's not waste facility, but the use was processing, and that's all they wanted to know. And again, I understand what you mean, and end-of-life mattresses for us is waste, but for case of planning, when you say waste, as a general person, it is waste. As workers, we are waste team, but we are not landfills. So as long as it is a process, they're fine with it. So.
And Jennifer pointed that out quite correctly. We're talking about cross purposes here, to a degree. You may well get an approval under the. Thanks, Mike.
I want to take.
Yeah, you may well get an approval under the Planning Act, but at the same time, you may be operating illegally under the environment legislation, and I don't want to be a director of Liverpool Council when that happens. Because you know you need a lawyer.
I know one. Do we have any other questions? I might ask a question, if I may. Michael, your four examples were quite fascinating, particularly the first one with the project that had a great deal of community concern, and then it was up and running, and then it was totally fine, which makes me often think about this increasing requirement that there be at least a perception that there's a social licence before a development consent is granted. But it's often my experience that there are development applications that are highly controversial, that have a lot of trouble getting through the planning process. There's a lot of angst about whether there's a social licence, but when they're up and running, the noise isn't there, the odour isn't there, all the things that people were concerned about just don't come to be. Do you have any views about how we're dealing with the social licence aspect in that context?
Variably. It's a very hard one to chase because it's different for every project that you do. For some projects, it's very simple to get people on board. I think it's fair to say that a lot of projects, the catastrophisation of what the externalities may be during the assessment process plays a disproportionate role in the overall assessment, to the point that technical evidence becomes less valuable. Now, obviously, across society over the last few decades, we've seen increasing attack on technical evidence and science as ways of actually communicating the way that we do things. Now, obviously, in a planning process, we can't say that the community has no role to play in expressing their views on what outcomes should be. But the founding of the process of assessment of most of these things is a technical assessment of are the impacts of a proposal going to be acceptable in the circumstances. If we just go down a line of every time someone says, I don't like this, we're going to make it not just impossible, but just hard and introduce delays and often put too much weight on that level of commentary. Ultimately, we're affecting our ability to get things that absolutely need to be done. If we look at some examples of how other sectors have dealt with some of these things, when mobile phone use was going through the roof in the 90s and early 2000s, and it's an odd one because it is licensed under Commonwealth legislation for some activities and state legislation for other activities. There was a real way of redefining the way you go about assessment of those facilities to basically ensure that they get approved as essential infrastructure. And it's a bit of a crux of our industry. Is it essential infrastructure? And if so, that needs to be spelt out much more clearly in the whole planning and development assessment process. We've got a policy document, it's only a few years old. If you actually print it out, it runs to some 3,000 pages and doesn't include the word circular economy, sorry, that's a phrase, or a term, doesn't include that term anywhere in that document.
Thanks, Michael. I note the time.
Oh, we run out?
We've run out. Maybe you can come up and ask your question privately after. But we've reached the time. Thank you very much. I'd like everyone, please thank your four presenters. It was very